My name is Ajmal Biden, the chair of MORE, which is Movement Among for Race Equity. And we have a program in Botswana in Southern Africa called Salelo, which deals with a lot of issues related to international challenges dealing with race, ethnic disparities, ethnic issues, and also building greater racial harmony among the different groups within the respective countries. Today we have with us Merapelo Letebele. We also know her as Shana, and she is our project coordinator in the program in Southern Africa. And so today we're going to have her talk about some of the things that she's working on and some of the issues related to the program, and also give the participants a chance to raise questions and talk more with her about what is happening in her part of the world. So Shauna, welcome to this program that we're doing here in our community.
Thank you.
I want to start off and ask you kind of like, I know we were talking about the topic deals with patriarchal and the systems that impacts people in Southern Africa and its relationship to what happens in the United States. And so can you give us a little bit of definition of what the patriarchal system is and what it looks like in Southern Africa, particularly in Botswana?
Yes. Basically, the biggest issue is social justice. As women in the Republic of Botswana and many other Southern African countries, we are faced with a situation where we still have patriarchal systems in our social lives, where the men dominate and control resources, which leads to women being kicked out of the economic spectrum. Basically, patriarchy perpetuates gender inequalities. So I'll throw some light into how it is working out in Botswana, specifically because as the one-half member of the Botswana society, kicking women out of the economic spectrum means that there can never be gender equality and no social justice. If you deny the women the right to have the same amount of resources and rights, impacts the development of the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know we're showing a couple of slides here, number of slides. I want to kind of go through them and raise that. But in terms of society, you talked about a timeline in here. And what does that mean when you say a timeline in that country? And also you have a term cultural, which I don't quite understand. Explain that to us.
Okay, basically, when you have the women not participating, not having access to the to the economic power base of a country, that is very harmful to the women and the society at large. And the timeline that I was going to quickly go over is to show how this has progressed in my society. I'm in the Republic of Botswana. I'm a citizen of the Republic of Botswana, and the people in my country are called Botswana. So whenever I say the Botswana society, just know that I'm talking about Botswana. So the ways in which a patriarchy was introduced and enforced in my culture was through mainly the Kotla system, which is sort of like a court system where only males were admitted into where they sat together, just like you can see in the picture, and they made all the rules and regulations governing our society. And the problem with it was that it excluded women. Women were not allowed to come into the Kotla until maybe about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, in the 70s. So this is where the men used to gather and dispense justice, make rules and things like that. So if you are making rules for the whole society, but the one arm of the society or the one half of the society, being the females, are excluded, it means that things that matter to them, things that impact their lives, are discussed without their involvement, and obviously that's not going to lead to a good outcome for the society.
Yeah. Now, you use this word, I'm not sure.
Bojali.
What does that mean? What does that explain that?
So one of the ways that patriarchy in my culture was perpetuated was through the initiation systems, where you had males going through an initiation system and females having their own. So the female one was called Bojali, and this is where the indoctrination took place. Older women, matrons of the society, brought all these young girls together when they reached puberty, and they taught them how to behave, what to do and what not to do. And this indoctrination featured mostly women to see themselves and accept themselves as being subservient to the men. So those two girls that you see in the picture were the initiates, and they were made to carry all these bundles of twigs, which were very heavy and uncomfortable. And it was one of the ways that lessons were enforced, and they used to get whippings and things like that to say, when I leave this Bojali initiation ceremony, I'll be a woman, and my job is to serve the men, cook, clean, do everything that you know that even in the Western world, the women are not happy about, the fact that men are not helping them with household chores and things like that. So in my culture, this is where the women were told, specifically indoctrinated into accepting and owning that sort of system, which was based on inequality, that you are subservient and the man is more dominant and powerful.
Mm-hmm. Now, marriage, we talk a little bit about marriage.
Okay. I talked about the khotla, I talked about the initiation system. Now, marriage was the third thing that was also used to enforce patriarchy. And it started off with child betrothals, where little girls were promised in marriage to whichever man, and the man could be much older, 20, 30 years older than the child. And so from a young age, in my culture, before colonization, women used to be given off to men to marry, but they were not marrying children. They waited until they've gone through the Bojali ceremony, as I've shown you. And the marriages were arranged by their parents. You had no say in who you were going to marry. And marriage also featured a purchase of a bride, where the male's parents would pay cattle. These days, they also pay money in order for them to marry a young girl. And if you didn't pay it, then your marriage was not considered to be legitimate. And another element of it was that women, the levirate marriage means when you are married, a young lady or a woman, when your husband dies, then you can be passed off to his brother. And if you died, you could also be replaced. The man had a right to go back to your parents to ask for a sister or a replacement. Additionally, there was an incestuous element to the marriages, in the sense that the preferred partner for marriage was somebody's cousin, your first cousin. You could be married off to your first cousin. And the sixth point was polygamy, where a man could marry multiple wives, maybe five women, 2 women, depending on what he could afford. And I might just add that whenever the cattle were paid for a purchase of a bride, these cattle did not go to the woman herself, but it was the cattle were kept so that when her brothers get married earlier on, then they would have something to buy more brides with. So basically, it was an outright sale, but the woman didn't benefit anything from it.
John, as you allude to these happened years ago and they create the foundation that exists today, or is this something that happened in the 18th century, 19th century? When? The thing that is still remaining is the purchase of the bride. We still expect the men to pay a bride price, but all the other ones have fallen off, just because when we gained independence, when we became civilized in quote marks, some of these things were outlawed by the churches and all the other, Western systems that we adopted. Gotcha. Now, talk a little bit more about the gender roles among the Botswanas.
Because we are talking about social justice, the gender roles had a very big role in subjugating the women. For instance, I can just give you these 2 examples of some of the earliest Europeans who lived among my people in the 1800s. One of them just said, when he was observing the life of the Botswana people, he said that it is the province of the women to build their houses and do all those kind of things. And maybe about 40 years later, another man called Chapman came along and he saw the women doing all the tilling, all the building of the houses and all these kind of things. Whereas the men had the lightest duties of taking care of the cattle and going hunting and maybe going to war. But obviously going to war was not something that you did every day. But for a woman, you had to make sure that you built the house, you built all the food, you made all the pots and everything. So now we're talking about social justice. So the ones who did all the work didn't derive, much benefits from it. Basically, that's what I'm trying to show with these gender roles. And on this next slide, I'm just showing how Botswana women used to dress. We used to wear these clothes made from animal skins, and it was the domain of the men to make up the clothes. So because they control the cattle, they made some of the clothes out of those, and they went hunting as well. So that's why the women ended up looking naked, because the men were in charge.
Colonization in Botswana
Yeah.
society.
So somewhere along the line in the 18th century, 19th century, we had a lot of Europeans coming into Africa and colonizing the continent. And when they came here, they found that they thought that our culture was heathen. And now I'm asking the question, I'm posing the question to say, could this heathen culture, the destruction of this heathen culture, have helped the Botswana women? Because a lot of these things were outlawed. And hot on the heels of colonialism, we also had slavery, with Africans being taken away from the continent by Europeans to go elsewhere. And they instituted racism and Christianity, in addition to paid labor, where now the men suddenly had all this income and disposable income to buy all these European manufactured goods. And that kind of changed the way the society was arranged, because in the past, the Botswana women used to do everything. They used to do all the work. Now, suddenly, the men who went to work for the European farmers came back with some money and articles of European manufacture, which means it kind of changed. So now I'm trying to say, because they brought, digging hoes and all these agricultural implements, that kind of eased off the workload of the women somewhat.
One of the questions I have also is that even though you talk about Botswana women, does that take place only in the country we know Botswana there? Did it happen in Southern African countries like Namibia or South Africa or Lesotho or so on? Do they have many of the same things that you're talking about today in those respective countries in the history in terms of this?
I think it happened on a much larger scale. A lot of African women used to do most of the work, but in some of the societies around in the Tswana polity, men used to do some of the agricultural work, but in my culture, that's where they did the bulk of the agricultural work. And so I think it varies. Some of them had it, some of it, like my culture, it was primarily the domain of the women to do all the difficult, the hard work, the hard labor.
Got you. Now, we're moving into the 21st century here. Give me a little bit more background on what's going on today.
So all these things were happening until when Botswana got its independence in 1966. But some of the laws were still very heavy on the women. And it was only in 2004 where we had this abolition of the Marital Power Act, where the government cancelled all this marital power that the men used to have. Suddenly, the man is not the head of the household, and women could also have equal powers in the property that the marriage had produced. So, I have that definition of what marital power is. And one interesting aspect is that, according to this theory, they thought that marital power was derived from the fact that a man had more resources to contribute to the home. And I just put it in there to show that in my culture, that is not the case, because the women did all the work. So the women did all the work. The economic life of the home was centered around the labor of the woman. So in my culture, men got all this marital power from the patriarchy.
So in today's society, then women and men who are married, they share an equal property rights now today?
Yes, they do.
Africa? Okay.
They do. But what you're going to find is that the men still regard themselves as the head of the family, just because a lot of them are now Christian, and Christianity also says that the man is the head of the family. So even if the law says all partners are equal, you find that, and in 2004 is less than 20 years ago, socially, very little has changed in that aspect for a Botswana woman.
Gotcha. What are some of the impacts of this patriarchal system in terms of Botswana? Give me a little bit of oversight.
The impact is that the women's lot has not changed. The women's economic power in the country, in the society, in the family has not changed because the men still control the resources of the family. And this is, this is derived from the religious teaching, like I said, and the cultural things, because now we know that the laws has changed. And one of the saddest thing is that we have a lot of unmarried mothers who are just vulnerable economically, because when a young woman has a baby, then she just has to take care of that child until that child starts going to the formal education for the formal schools. So that makes them vulnerable, and women don't have political power in Botswana. And we still have these societal expectations and cultural norms that makes women understand and believe and act like they're inferior to the men. So, all these things reinforce gender inequalities.
Wow. What is the current economic situation, poverty situation today in Botswana or in Southern Africa?
Okay, the information that I'm showing here is from a survey that was done by Statistics Botswana, which is the authority on statistics in the country, which shows that in 2019, the population was still 2.4 million, and all these people were spread out in 429 households. So they actually took out 300. Can you please go back to the last slide?
I'm there. Sorry, I went back. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So 3,000 households where they surveyed to see what the poverty rate was. And they were able to see that out of all those 3,240 households, 57.9, basically 58% of the houses received some kind of, help from government in the form of social safety net packages. And these include food and a little bit of money. And out of that 387 households, 55.9, basically 56% of them were female-headed. And so you can see that the majority of the people who received help from government were female-headed households, which means homes that are led and headed by females bears the most burden of the poverty in the country.
Wow. That's also the same way in the United States. A disproportionate number of women are impacted, or low income, women of color, particularly African Americans and so on. But this is very much of a global problem we're facing. Give a little bit of input on these pictures you have from The Voice. What is this about?
Yeah, this is also one of the things that we see. Violence against women is a permanent crisis. The men in Botswana, week in, week out, there are all these horrific reports of all this violence against women, just because of the patriarchy that I've been talking about. Every week when you open the newspapers, although this is a tabloid, every week there's a story on some kind of violence against the women. It's always mostly against the women that's happening. And it's also just one of the results of this patriarchal nature that we and culture that we live in. I don't know if you can go back.
Oh, sorry about that. Go back.
Yeah, if you can just go back four slides, just 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. There's something that I wanted to show. 4. That on.
This one?
No, the next one. Okay, so basically, no, okay, not that one. Can you go back 2 more? Sorry. No, go forward, sorry. Yes, this one. Basically, if you look at the nature of patriarchy that's in my culture, and you just juxtapose it with racism or slavery, you'll see that they're almost like the same thing. The way that the European slavers treated the Africans is the same way that the African men are treating women from traditionally, even though things are a little bit better, but its effects are still felt even in 2023. In my time right now, a lot of these things are happening where the women still work and they don't in the homes taking care of everybody, but they don't get paid. African men still have polygamy, even in my culture, even though it is not as common as it used to be. And if women are still being sold when they're getting married, it's just like when the slaves used to be sold. And So you just have to wonder what the difference really is. To me, it feels like they are so similar. And if we think that slavery was a horrible thing, I would say even patriarchy is a horrible thing in the same sense, in the same depth, in the same way. So we can go back to the other slide.
Right here, this slide here, we're here. Or
No, go on.
Go on beyond this?
A few more, yeah. Next. Yes.
Okay, other considerations? So at this point, we wanted to ask the audience if they can look in terms of what ways do men treat women in Botswana, Southern African society different from either women of color or other women in our society. So it's kind of a conversation we can have among ourselves, but also we can share that with Shauna. And then the other question we had is how can we work to help transform our respective societies on not only dealing with this international patriarchal system, but also what are some specific things we could do to challenge it within our worldview or within our circle of influence. And then the last question is, how is this related to anti-racism and race equity work? Because a lot of people don't necessarily make that equal, or at least look at the equivalent of looking at slavery and sexism and the patriarchal system as being having the same output of the same condition. So those are some kind of questions that we threw out for people to consider as we move forward into the conversation. At this point, I guess we're going to open it up for feedback, reactions, and also direct questions to Shauna about some of her presentation that she made during this slide presentation. So at this point, we'll stop and then give people a chance to kind of think and ponder a little bit, and then we'll go from here. Although, by the way, this is the contact information of our Merapelo Letebele. We also call her Shauna. You've heard us refer to me as Shauna, but that's her formal name. And so we throw that out so people know that. And that's her contact information. And I think that ends our slideshow. So at this point, we'll stop.
You haven't ended the recording.
Yeah, I'm going to end the recording now. Honey, stop the recording. There we go.